Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Dynasty Market Watch. This is episode 1.05. I'm one of your hosts, Todd Halverson. I'm joined with Brian O'Leary and Matt Davis. This week, we're talking Dynasty market value for rookie wide receivers. We're going to be weighing in on the latest Twitter debate, which is, of course, Quentin Johnston. And what is he worth? Running backs are boring, but we are going to do a little check-in on the running backs. And of course, we're going to review some of our latest trades. But Brian, let's go ahead and kick it off. Hit us with our Bull Bear.
Yeah, Todd, this is a topical one. This has been flying all over the group chats, all over Twitter. My bull of the week is Quentin Johnston. Speaking of group chats, I know, Matt, you've been sending some hot takes out there.
I'm pretty concerned about QJ. I'm definitely not looking to buy, but let me know if you can change my mind. So what's the bull case for QJ here?
Yeah, Matt. So first of all, I think anyone that knew much about Quentin Johnston in college, he was always a developmental project. He wasn't necessarily going to come in. That first round draft capital is based on talent and ceiling. I still think those things exist. I don't know if they're utilizing him great. So I kind of look at someone like Treylon Burks from last year, who struggled a little bit as a rookie, but kind of held value. And I think right now his market's a little depressed. So it's just something to look into.
You mentioned Treylon Burks. So one thing that I found interesting is on Fantasy Calc, Burks, I feel like they're kind of both similarly. People are hating on him right now. So Burks is down to wide receiver 47 Fantasy Calc, and Quentin Johnston is still hanging out in the high 30s at wide receiver 38. I did find it interesting, Matt, that there was that significant of a gap, because just for me, now I'm a Treylon Burks homer, but I still feel a little bit more optimistic about him than I do Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, a lot of people are familiar, I'm sure, with the face planner theory for rookie wide receivers. I think it was popularized by Drew at DF Bean Counter on Twitter. Essentially, if a rookie wide receiver loses, I believe it's 50 spots in ADP from rookie to sophomore year, they almost never hit. The hit rate is, I think it might be 0%, or it's extremely low. I think this is the time of year you have to start wondering if your rookie wide receiver that you're talking about is really going to turn it around. It reminds me a lot of Sky Moore last year, where around this time of year, people wanted to start panicking, and a lot of people that were big fans of Sky said, no, you got to be patient. You got to be patient. I think it's time to start getting concerned.
So listen, I'm not saying I'm not concerned. I'm not paying 107 price tags, and I don't think he costs that. So I think that's the big thing that keep in mind here, context wise. I'm thinking it's more of a mid to late second, and maybe a small filler if you have to a panicking manager. And for me, the reason I used Burks is just that he struggled mightily as a rookie, and in the offseason, the following season, coming into his second year, he got hyped again. He got value. It opens another window. If you are panicking about, Treylon Burks, you could have sold him. If you are panicking about Quentin Johnston, I think you could sell him next offseason. So that's where the insulation comes in a little bit.
Yeah, one difference between him and Burks and QJ is that Burks did produce some his rookie year, and he had some decent peripheral numbers. It just feels a lot more like QJ is more of the Sky Moore. But the difference between Sky Moore and QJ for me is I do think that QJ is a little bit better prospect. It is a first round draft capital, so that does help. And we're also only through 6 games. So Sky Moore, we saw a full season and some change now, and we've seen nothing. But QJ is already getting the Sky Moore treatment. So if I'm on a rebuild and I can get him for that mid-2 price that you're talking about, I'm in on that. I would prefer not to be sending out my draft picks of mid-2. And I also think it's probably going to be difficult to do that because the person that got them, they're not really wanting to sell. If they're a contender, the mid-2 doesn't help them. If they're a rebuild, QJ might just be a better option as a rebuild. So I'm looking at that same mid-2 value, and maybe someone like a Gabe Davis or maybe DeAndre Hopkins, if I have him on a contender, I want to sell. I wouldn't mind doing something like that. I do think that there's a lot of people that got him are just going to hold.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, everyone, we've talked about this before. That top 6 of the rookie draft of 2023 was a clear tier that we then dropped. I think a lot of people potentially, that's what I want to investigate, were kind of just defaulted into like, I heard Quentin Johnston's good and he got drafted in the first round, so I'm going to take him. So it's not necessarily like pounding on the desk, I'm a Quentin Johnston guy. And that's like, and maybe I'm wrong. That's just something I want to at least, and I want to encourage other people to investigate the market and see what your league is like. Are there QJ out there?
Yeah, a mid 2 is definitely past my buy point. I can understand a late 2, and that might be splitting hairs. You said like maybe a small piece on top of that. I'm definitely not adding to a mid to late 2 for QJ right now. I just think it's trending one way. So my bear of the week is Dameon Pierce. He's a guy that I didn't love as a prospect. I think he had an impressive rookie year, real life wise, not fantasy wise, because he didn't draw targets. This preseason, there was a lot of talk about 3-down usage with Dameon Pierce. He has not gotten the 3-down usage that was talked about. And now this past week in a game that was competitive throughout the entire game, Devin Singletary outsnapped him 31-21. The way Dameon Pierce is used, if he is not getting 60% of the snaps and 85% of the rushing share, he's not a guy I have any interest in. So after seeing the first 5-6 weeks play out, he's definitely a guy that I'm trying to move off for any kind of compare, either like older running back with a little bit less value or like a younger guy like a Spears type guy on a contender. Yeah.
So Matt, it sounds like you're kind of concerned that the cliff could be approaching quickly, right?
I just don't think he has any viability for fantasy. I mean, so if he's splitting carries with Devin Singletary, you're looking at a ceiling of 12 points a game and like a floor of 3.
I guess my point is that the risk reward is not going to be strong enough that you don't want to necessarily be patient. You need to like be active in selling him before it's only trending in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, and I think the point here is what is the utility that he's bringing your team? Because if you're not counting on future production for him, which it's trending that way, and he's not giving you current production, then like I would definitely sell him for Raheem Mostert right now, who's 31 years old, because Raheem Mostert has utility to a team right now where Dameon Pierce doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think that one's getting done. I think what I'd be trying to do with Pierce, and I do have a couple where there were teams that were previously rebuild teams where I haven't quite bolstered out the running back room the way I would want to on a juggernaut roster. So I maybe had Pierce on a couple teams, and obviously it's not going great. He's basically just riding the pine right now for me.
Yeah.
But and trading him for a second is probably, it may not even be possible right now. I may not be able to trade Pierce for a second. So what I'd probably try to do is, and I think this is a good, you kind of open my eyes to make an attempt on this, would be to trade Pierce, maybe plus a wide receiver, like a Christian Kirk, for example, or a Calvin Ridley or a Debo, and basically go up half of a tier, maybe almost within the same tier, just someone I like more. And
yeah,
you're borderline punting him, but you're filling out your roster in a way that you prefer and just kind of get him off your roster. I mean, it is sort of a punt, but I would aim for using him in the value of a second round pick.
Yeah, you have to add something to him for another piece. I think that's the only way to realistically sell him. I would definitely sell my shares for a second, though. Right?
Somebody that's in Buy-Mageddon this week, they've got CMC out. They've got Joe Mixon out. They've got all these running backs out.
Dameon Pierce is out.
Dameon Pierce is out. Okay, so this is not a good week to do it. Next week, let's sell Dameon Pierce when there's running backs that are out. That might be the opportunity. Especially, this is another good thing. I think sometimes coming out of the bye, it does help. People kind of forget how crummy someone was in their last performance.
Yeah.
Like right now it'd be difficult to sell Pierce. I mean, after the bye, there's like, okay, he's, a filler running back for a few weeks. I might be able to use him.
That's a little distance makes the heart grow fonder type
Exactly.
action there. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to go into my bull and I actually the bye week situation kind of just happened with JSN leading up to this past week, and JSN is the guy that I want to talk about. And the thing with JSN for me is that I was really high on JSN, and I still am really high on his prospect profile. He was my clear-cut number one, hashtag tier of his own. I still love the player and the long-term outlook. The issue for me is that the situation is not changing anytime soon. Lockett and DK are going to continue to leave him irrelevant really for the rest of the year, in my view. He's going to have probably a pop week at some point. He had a decent performance this past week with DK in and out of the lineup for injury. And the thing with him right now is that he still holds significant market value at wide receiver 20. The bottom hasn't dropped out like it has for QJ or for guys like Burks or Dotson or Jerry Jeudy. These other guys that where there's been that sadness moment, and now he's still holding the value. I think you can still trade him and get a first round pick. And I'm recommending selling him. And if you want to say like, oh, you're trying to time the market, that's fine. I would probably view it as like shorting him in a sense. And I would just see, I just see this getting a lot worse before it gets better. And I do think it eventually gets better. And I'm absolutely fine, or I'm absolutely going to be trying to get him at the end of the season. So I have a trade that I've had two trades really that I've made over the last 5 days. So I want to get your feedback on them and just kind of where you all are at with JSN. But let's just kind of, Matt, where are you at with JSN? I know last week you were attempting to buy him. Where are you at with JSN now after a pretty decent performance, really?
I'm still buying him. I think the only thing that I would add to what you were saying is I believe this past week was their first week that their left tackle, Charles Cross, came back. And that also coincided with JSN seeing the highest 8 out of the season. So if Seattle can get decent tackle play, I think you can see, even in a wide receiver 3 role, JSN's role expand a little bit and his opportunities expand. I'm definitely buying for a mid to late first right now. If that's all it costs, a mid to late first, I would not sell for just that right now. But Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. I would buy at that price. That being said, I get Todd's point that he's almost trying to short the market here, that he could sell now and buy cheaper because he's going to have some struggles, which I agree with for the rest of this year, probably depending on unless there's injuries. So I think JSN's name carries a lot of cachet because of who he outproduced in college.
Yeah.
And that's something that's going to get a lot of people hung up on him for longer than maybe they should. So that's where I'm curious. And that's why that's kind of cool that I like seeing Todd making some JSN trades either side.
Yeah. So I targeted CD Lamb in a league where I have a lot of depth and not a lot of top end talent. So I was really targeting CD Lamb to bolster that lineup, give it some pop. And I had guys like JSN, QJ, Dotson on the team, and people, when I was targeting other players, JSN was the guy that everybody wanted. Of course, everybody was already done with QJ, even before this past week. So I traded away JSN 25-1 and 25-2 for CD Lamb and then some young Kenneth Gainwell and Hunter Henry. But that was a JSN 25-1, 25-2 for CD Lamb, Gainwell and Henry. Matt, where do you stand on that offer? I know you've given me feedback already.
Yeah, I like the JSN side. I've never been a huge Lamb fan. I feel like for the past 4 years it's been him versus AJ Brown, and I would just always prefer AJ Brown. So I've never rostered a lot of Lamb. I think it's fair though, because I think Lamb is worth a little over 2 firsts. I think JSN is worth a first, and then Gainwell. So it was JSN of 25 first and a 25 second for Lamb, Gainwell, and Hunter Henry. So I think value wise, it's completely even. but I would prefer the JSN side. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I think the trade definitely made sense. I'll probably take I'll take your side here, Todd, because I think Lamb
You feel sorry
was
for me?
yes, one, yes, two with because of who you traded with. I'm gonna usually side with the other team. Shots fired again. Yeah. But I think Lamb, I think you might have bought him at a very slightly discounted, depressed value. And then he had a pretty good showing, despite, we'll talk maybe a little bit later about Dallas's offense in general. But I mean, Lamb was getting the ball. So I'm not a huge football guy, but getting the ball is good. Talented guys getting the rock is always a good thing. So.
Yeah, I felt like CeeDee Lamb, there's guys like him, Garrett Wilson, they don't come available very often. So when you can get them in leagues, I really like to try to hop on that. The other trade that I made, I sent away JSN and Pitts, and I acquired ETN and Hawkinson. This trade was on a contender. I was kind of looking to swap JSN for ETN, but the guy was a full-on tank. He wanted to swap the Pitts and Hawkinson side, and I already had Andrews on this team. So I was, now I've got Andrews and Hawkinson and, kind of figure out the rest later. But that was the second move that I've made, selling JSN. So later in the year, I am going to be looking to buy some. So that's my sell on the Bull Bear. Let's just kind of keep the rookie wide receivers rolling. We've already talked QJ. We've already talked JSN. Yeah. Let's hop into Josh Downs. We've got Marvin Mims. We've got Puka, Tank Dell. Matt, I know Josh Downs is someone that you're really high on right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely high on Downs. So friend of the podcast, Dynasty Zoltan, he was a big fan of Josh Downs this summer. There are a lot of film guys that really like Josh Downs compared to this class that thought, draft capital aside, he was a top 5 wide receiver in this class. I love what I've seen just from the highlights so far. I love seeing him used downfield. You've seen some of his contested catch. You see some nasty route work. And going back to our play caller segment a couple of weeks ago, I want any part of Shane Steichen's offense that I can get. Shane Steichen is a guy I have a lot of respect for with what he's doing with Indy. He's the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. If anyone wasn't aware, he was offensive coordinator with Philly last year.
And my hero.
Yeah, and I think we see Philly's offense struggling a little bit without him. And so I look at the Colts offense right now. AR is prohibitively expensive. Michael Pittman is an interesting guy, but we'll keep it on the rookies here. Downs is a guy I've found to be I think his cost is reasonable, and I think you can get him at a reasonable price.
So Matt, let's talk cost. What are you paying? What is the max you're paying?
I'm trading QJ for him, so we can start there. I would move off my QJ shares for Josh Downs right now. I would rather have him over Marvin Mims. I would trade Dotson for him. So
what are you selling him for?
Downs?
Yeah. What does it take, rookie base value?
Probably 2-2s. I mean, I'm not crazy about Downs. If I got 2 decent seconds, I would consider moving them.
So buy for a mid to
sell for 2-2s.
Yeah, maybe they force your hand on a third. On the perfect situation, you might consider.
I think he's worth a mid-second. So just straight up, I think he's valued. I think he should be valued as a mid-second, let's say 206. So if someone wants to offer me 2 of those picks next year for him, sure, I'll take it. But in general, he's not a guy I'm looking to sell. I do think he's going to continue flashing and slightly raising his value the rest of the season. So I'm not really trying to sell him near his market price right now.
You mentioned Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is a guy that I've really been trying to buy, and I was doing it at the worst possible time whenever he was playing really well on limited snaps, and now the last couple of weeks he's really not done much. I saw an interesting trade today: Jacoby Myers and Jonnu Smith for Marvin Mims, a contender tank swap. Where would you guys stand? Jacoby Myers, Marvin Mims, and throw in Josh Downs, Brian.
Jacoby Myers, Josh Downs, and Mims.
Yes.
Downs, Myers, Mims for me personally. But I love Jacoby Myers. I think he could take off. I'm a little biased too with Downs, so it's because of being a Colts fan, but Downs gets open.
If you needed to trade Downs for Myers on a contender, would you do it? Like your flex this week? Okay, yeah, me too. But just in a vacuum, like we do a startup tonight, we're both taking Downs over Myers, but situationally, we're willing to trade Downs for Myers.
Yeah, I think Myers, not to get too off topic here, but I think he was a great value a few weeks ago, and people are starting to be like, oh, this guy's producing pretty regularly, and it seems to be more of a consistent.
The fact that he's
not as high as ceiling as Adams, but he's more consistent than Adams in the offense right now.
Yeah, him outscoring Adams finally has people's attention.
Well, I mean, he's right now wide receiver 36 on Fantasy Calc. Marquise Brown is wide receiver 34 and McLaurin is wide receiver 35. So he's not cheap anymore, Jacoby Myers. So, and the next guy behind him at wide receiver 37 is another rookie wide receiver, Rashee Rice, who anybody going out and saying buy Rashee Rice hasn't probably tried to buy Rashee Rice because nobody's selling him. He is not purchased at reasonable prices right now.
Well, stay tuned for our trade of the week segment later.
Okay, so maybe Matt, who can always find a trade partner, has finally found someone. But Rashee Rice, man, I think he's like in the low 30s for the person that has him most of the time. Now, obviously, there's some leagues where you might be able to steal him off someone's roster, but in leagues that we're playing in, the person that has Rashee Rice is not willing to just jump ship. It could be even on a contender team. They're just willing to hold out.
Yeah. That's what I've seen too. I think Rice is a tough guy to get right now.
So for me, Rashee Rice, I've mentioned a few weeks ago that I would have taken Michael Wilson. That was probably a little aggressive, but like Todd and Matt, you've mentioned, I'm selling him 10 out of 10 times if someone's going to value him like he's a back end 1, early 2 rookie pick wide receiver, especially with this wide receiver class potentially coming in. It looks awesome on paper. I'm not sold on Rashee Rice.
So you said you have Downs over Mims. Do you have Mims over Rice?
They're both kind of like, to me, they both kind of have different question marks. So I'd view them pretty similarly, I guess.
I would go Rice, Mims, Downs. I really like the upside that Mims presents on his ability, on his deep ability. I think that's a game changer for me. I think he probably has that extra level. Downs is really good in the slot and really good at getting open. So he has that. Mims just isn't getting on the field, and when he is, he's not getting it.
Last week any targets. So I think this is a trade you could do. Right, I definitely think this is a trade you could do right now, Brian. If you have Rashee Rice, are you offering that to the QJ owner?
Offering Rashee Rice for QJ?
For QJ as part of trying to.
They're back to back on Fantasy Calc right now.
You're trying to buy QJ at that mid-2 price.
I probably would. I already have a lot of QJ, so like that's kind of part of like I'm maybe a different, worse example than what I would recommend for other people doing in this situation. But on its surface, it's my only team. Yeah, I would do that.
I think the other thing with QJ on the kind of the buy case for him is not necessarily to buy at market today, because we're going to get to like the end of the week and yesterday's price is not going to be today's price, if you will. And so I'm going to be looking to try to buy, and I have several of QJ as well. So I'm a little hesitant on buying more, and he wasn't even a guy that I didn't get any of him in rookie drafts. Not one. I traded for him in the offseason when people were, seeing that he was going to be the wide receiver 3 or 4 on that team. But I think maybe moving down further into the list, I think I saw someone offer a Cortland Sutton. I kind of like something like that for QJ. Maybe if you're,
to me, Sutton does not belong in this conversation.
But trading Sutton for QJ.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that. I just don't think you can.
That's the person we're talking about throwing some shit at the wall and seeing if it sticks, and that's fine to do too. And see how much panic there is going on in camp.
While we're in the middle of this rookie section, I do think there's a guy that I put squarely in this range that is easy to forget about because he had a concussion and missed the this last week's game is Tank Dell. I am like, Texans truther, Stroud truther. I love that passing offense this year. And I think Tank Dell has already kind of shown enough to where he's really exciting. And I don't know. I think I'd rather have Tank Dell than Mims and Rice, actually. And I'm not sure about Downs. I think
agree.
I'd have Downs at the top, but I think Tank Dell is squarely right in that group for me.
Yeah, I like Dell because I think they're all very similar talent.
Yeah.
As far as if you think about Rice, Mims, Downs, I think they're all pretty similar talent, but I get Stroud if I have Tank Dell. And he's basically a starter. I would assume when he comes back, he's going to jump back over Noah Brown. So it's basically Dell, Robert Woods, and Nico Collins.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get Stroud, Brian, if I'm looking at him versus Rice. Now Rice has Mahomes, but Rice is also playing like 40% of the snaps.
I think, Todd, I think it's another good point to make, that sometimes people get stuck on like, well, this guy was ranked higher in my rookie wide receiver rankings than another guy, but you have to plan for and understand the difference in situation. And CJ Stroud, we've all talked about it. We'll save your time here. Looks like a bona fide stud. That gives at least a little bit of a boost for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's almost an interesting segment, I think, to kind of go back to some of the rookie tight ends. Michael Mayer flashed a lot, and you can compare him to a guy, Kincaid, who has a lot of his value tied up into the quarterback that he plays with, but he hasn't necessarily shown it on the field yet. So a couple weeks ago, you've always been Laporta tight end one since the season started, Brian. We all kind of had Mayer fourth when we did tight ends a couple weeks ago. I think we're moving him up a little bit now. Are we having him above Kincaid yet, or what do you think, Brian?
I'm not, but I've Michael Mayer, meh.
The Mayer nickname,
but he's starting to pop a little bit. So this is a good example. You don't want to get stuck on your priors and just say, no, he stinks because I said he stinks and I want to look smart. Like sometimes you're wrong, and maybe I'm wrong in this situation. In this case, you don't want to just dump him just because. Todd, what do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't move him above Kincaid yet, because what we just saw the last 2 weeks, really just 1 week from Mayer. All it takes is 1 week from Kincaid, and then we're all getting excited about Kincaid again. So no, I got too low on Mayer for a bit. I can admit that.
I think a lot of us did.
Yeah, I'm probably just going to hold at Mayer and Musgrave are kind of in the similar tier together. Kincaid a half tier above them, and then Laporta is a distant first for me.
Yeah, full tier above everyone else.
Yeah, totally. And just for context, like we didn't really attach any like numbers in terms of Mayer. Matt sent me an offer this past week after the game, 25-2 for Mayer, and I declined. Just as again, you don't want to be too early to quit on somebody or turn your head against them. So just some context there.
That's what I kind of found out after sending a lot of Mayer offers out the last couple of days. I'm not going to go crazy with a buy price. Nobody's selling him at like a mid-2 value right now. So he's just a firm hold. I don't really think Mayer's a buy or a sell right now. And most of these rookie tight ends are just holds, in my opinion. The class was supposed to be almost historically good, and it's looking very good so far. So I think these guys are just holds.
It's probably a good reminder that when rookie tight ends, when they struggle early on, we shouldn't be just tossing them out the window like we did with Mayer. So probably a good lesson for the future. Take a note for next year, and hopefully we can be better for it.
And Todd, this is a nice segue into our next segment here, and I think this person that we're about to talk about has struggled a little bit, has definitely not met people's expectations. Another rookie. This is one of the guys that was in that top 6 that we talked about before. That seemed to be a tier above everyone else, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs. So I think everyone was excited after week 1. They saw popping things on the tape that looked great. He looked fast, but then Montgomery just kind of took the role. Is this maybe a time coming off an injury Is this a time where maybe we can buy Gibbs back at like more of a reasonable factored in price, Todd?
Yeah, I think I think it's difficult in the sense of the person that got him. They've sat through the injury, and I just don't see them just being willing to sell at a discount. Kind of when we talk about guys that have gotten injured, it's more about like, okay, now they're available. I think he's probably very available. The person that has him is a little bit squeamish. They might be willing to move him, but I don't think that you're going to go in and be like, oh, I came away with this steal price on Gibbs. If you wanted to move him for say or if you wanted to go in and buy him for Swift, I know we've talked about him. I'm still great with that. Maybe someone like Josh Jacobs, I'm still good with that. But I don't think, Brian, that there's many guys that are just willing to dump him right now for.
So that's what I was going to kind of say, like in general price, I would pay less than what he was worth in the offseason, which is like a 1+2. I would pay that right now for Gibbs probably.
I think he was worth 2-1 solidly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think right now it's a little depressed potentially.
So you're paying a mid to late 1 and 2 for him right now?
I would, yeah.
My issue with Gibbs is that I don't have a great sense of what kind of team I would want him on right now, because I want my running backs to produce if I'm a contender. And on a rebuild or tank, I just don't really want any running backs. And I want to try to take goose eggs at running back if I can, or just minimal points. And he's going to be producing in some capacity. So I just don't have a good sense of where I would have him. And on the teams that I do have him on, and they are contenders, I am a little squeamish, and I wouldn't mind selling for someone that is going to produce, but I don't want to sell. I mentioned a couple of names, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift. I don't want to sell them for those guys. So I'd really be shooting a lot higher.
I think what I'm trying to do if I have him on a contender is I'm trying to add a second to him, and I'm trying to get ETN. And if I can't get ETN, I'm trying to get Jonathan Taylor. And another target that kind of fits in this running back section is I'm totally fine if you just trade Gibbs straight up for Ken Walker. I don't think you're going to regret that.
I think that's taking on a little unnecessary risk market-wise. Selling, I think Walker he's scored in 4 out of their 5 games. He's in terms of, again, if you're looking keep trade cut, and we definitely don't want to base everything off of that, but I think he's right behind HN rankings wise. So like RB6. I think this is
Walker.
Ken Walker, yeah. Exactly. I think you can get a lot more for that. And it's funny you say you'd trade up for ETN. I almost am looking, if I have ETN, I'm trying to trade down and get a package. And I'm looking at more like maybe a depressed Pollard value plus, say I'm going to win now team and I need a little more extra depth or starting strength. Maybe like Pollard plus DeAndre Hopkins or something like that for ETN, and it may be a small filler. That's something that I'm investigating. Keenan Allen for a little bit more of a filler.
Yeah,
Todd, what are your thoughts there?
So let's kind of, as we're going through the running backs, you've mentioned a couple names. We haven't touched on CMC yet. So CMC is another one that could you move Gibbs, Matt? What are you moving Gibbs plus to get to CMC?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm moving Gibbs. Like I said, Gibbs in a second. I mean, Gibbs in a first is too much for CMC, even on a contender. And I love CMC, but I'm not paying Gibbs in a first. Mm-hmm. But going back to like a guy that you mentioned, someone like Christian Kirk or something, someone that like some flex, like some flex receiver that is not
worth more than a second, but not quite a first.
Yeah. I'm willing to add that to get
like a Godwin
to get to CMC. I'm more concerned than I think you guys are about Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't think he's ever this year and next year. I don't see him being the guy in Detroit. Dan Campbell has been as clear as possible that David Montgomery is their 1A. I don't expect that to change next year. David Montgomery's under contract for 3 years. This is the first year of the contract. So all of their actions are meeting their rhetoric when it comes to Monty and Gibbs. I understand that Monty is about the boringest running back in the entire league, and that Gibbs is a Ferrari and very exciting. Dan Campbell doesn't see it that way. So
here's the thing. I don't think anyone, unless anyone was ill-advised in how they valued or saw Gibbs, I don't think anyone ever was like, oh, he's getting 20 carries to be effective. What I think the allure of him was a CMC light, where you're going to get that floor raising 4 or 5 catches. He's going to make big plays. He's going to be explosive in that sense, where he can be like an impactful guy on, say 10, 12 touches in general. And I still think that that's a thing that can happen. And Montgomery can still do his, 3 or 4 yards in a cloud of dust if he wants.
Going back to like what I was saying, similar age guys, like Ken Walker is a very young guy too. Like he's a workhorse with Seattle. He doesn't get a ton of targets, obviously, but I would just rather have someone like that than a 10 touch a game guy. I don't even know if Gibbs is going to get to that 12 to 15 touches, 12 to 14 touches that he really needs to be consistently productive.
Well, there's the question, right? So Todd, be our tiebreaker here. What do you think?
So Matt, I don't think that I was adamant enough, and I'm going to make it myself a little bit more clear here that the Gibbs that I have, I am totally on board with what you said back at the very top of this. Gibbs plus a second. Who of these guys can I get? Can I get Jonathan Taylor? Can I get Ken Walker? Can I get Travis Etienne? I'd probably start a little short of that. Could I get Gibbs and maybe like a junk player that's I don't really value at a second?
Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, that's a good one. Elijah Moore, something like that I can toss in to go get one of those guys.
Yeah.
Remember, we're hitting the bye weeks. Teams need fill players. So I think you could probably do that. And the good thing about this is that if we just think about Breece Hall, Etienne, Achane, Walker, Taylor, even like Barkley, Gibbs, Eckler, we've got a lot of different options. So you have a lot, maybe they're not all Gibbs plus a second for one of those guys, but you have a lot of different options to pivot if you're a contender and you need points right now.
Yeah, and I think if you're a contender and you need points, I'm definitely looking even further down like the menu basically, and I think Kamara and Aaron Jones are pretty cheap options that you can kind of take a look at, and they're going to cost you a lot less than Eckler. Kamara, man, it's funny because he's getting it done on volume, not efficiency like we're used to. But, I mean, he's averaging 19 points a game since he's been back. He's heavily involved in the offense. I don't know how much longer it'll last. But, Kamara and Aaron Jones, those are guys that are definitely less than a first-round value, definitely way lower price-wise than some of the guys we've been talking about. So I think that's a decent pivot too.
Brian, would you move Gibbs for a Kamara and a first-round pick?
I would need, I would. Depending on my depth, and like I'm not trading it to put Kamara in my flex if I need like that. If he's the final piece that I need something, in the shorter term, it just kind of brings me to my point in general during this bipocalypse and injury riddled season. Don't dismantle your entire layout and plan to fill 1 week. It's not redraft.
Yeah.
You're more often than not, if you're contending, you're probably facing a couple tank teams the rest of the season. You'll get a couple free wins there. So I want to really stress like, check your schedule. Don't panic on this type of stuff. Be the one that's, approaching the panickers. Don't be the panicky, I guess.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. So I think I'd agree with you. I do think that's an appealing trade to look at if you can get like a Kamara and a first, or again, I would
consider Pacheco in a first.
Pacheco in a first is I would definitely do that.
I think I would too. I'm kind of higher on Pacheco right now.
I like Pacheco a lot right now.
Yeah,
so he's almost a nice in between of all the, like you were mentioning all the different names, Todd. Mm-hmm. Like he's a nice in between mix of all of them. He's got some youth that you can like. He's got that 7th round draft capital that makes him acquirable kind of despite being on KC. He doesn't catch a ton of passes. Again, that makes him a little bit easier to buy, but he is catching more now. He is producing weekly. I definitely like Pacheco as an option there, especially if you can get like a decent mid first on top of that for Gibbs. So I think those are some good Gibbs pivot options.
All right, so we've spent a lot of time on running backs, maybe a little too much, arguably. So why don't we pivot to the more fun, sexy receiver rooms here?
Nothing like sexy old wide receivers.
Well, I want to touch on one younger that's maybe being a little overshadowed by an older guy right now, and that's Jalen Waddle. So I want to get your pulse, both of your pulses on Jalen Waddle. He's wide receiver 8 right now, keep trade cut, which I don't dislike. I think that's fine. But I wanted to kind of stress on teams that I have Waddle, looking at keep trade cut again, you can't base everything off of that, but it looks to me like you can get a plus onto Ayuk, Olave, Devontae, Diggs. I'm selling Waddle on a contender for any of those plus any type of plus.
If
Matt,
I can move Waddle
yeah.
for Ayuk and a plus all day, I was about to push back and say there's no chance you can do that. And now I'm looking at Fantasy Calc, which is a basically a data set of all the trades that are actually happening in leagues. So this is real tangible stuff here. And Ayuk is wide receiver 19, which blows my mind because for me, he's probably like around the wide receiver 12 mark.
Yeah,
maybe even wide receiver 11. So like if I'm making my tiers a little loose, Waddle and Ayuk are probably in the same tier for me.
Yeah,
I'd rather have Waddle straight up than Ayuk, but
I would.
But like,
you don't have to have it straight up.
What's that?
That's the thing. You don't have to have it straight up. That's the whole thing here. Is that like Waddle
but I move off. I move. See, Waddle for Diggs and a plus would be awesome if I'm contending and I can do that. Cooper Kupp is actually probably cheaper than Diggs, and even though similar price tier, but Devontae, I'm almost a little more worried about, like we said, getting outscored by Jacoby Myers for the season doesn't feel good. I think him and Jimmy might kind of struggle with their connection.
So for clarity purposes, Devontae, as in Eagles, Devontae Smith is the one I was talking about. I'm not necessarily buying for Devontae Adams of Raiders.
So when you mentioned Diggs, my mind went to Kupp and Devontae Adams because I always put Diggs, Kupp, and Devontae. So I'm saying if you can sell Waddle for one of those three guys and a plus, I do like that. Devontae Smith, I think he's almost a whole separate discussion. I'm not really sure what to do with him. What was the Devontae Smith point? I'm sorry.
So the point is Ayuk, Olave, Devontae Smith, Stephon Diggs. I should have clarified. All those guys are roughly behind or right above on keep trade cut. Jalen Waddle. They're all behind him. I'm sorry. So to me, that signals as someone that if you want to approach someone in your league and you can firmly say, hey, this is someone that I'm looking to give you, but I need a small plus. Mm-hmm. All of those guys I'm doing if I get a small plus.
There's a really nice list of wide receivers that have had a couple rough weeks that I still think are really good, and they're probably going to have a couple good weeks coming up. And this is a decent buy window for, we've mentioned the names, but just kind of going through them again. Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams. These guys, their value is not really changing from a like fantasy calc or wider or KTC keep trade cut value, but they are changing from the owner of those players is a little bit squeamish, uneasy, and they wouldn't mind. This would be an opportunity for you to maybe make a trade. Whereas 3 weeks ago, they were like, "Nah, Matt, I'm not moving my Devontae Smith. I don't want to. I don't really care what you offer me." And that's kind of where I would be with, like, if you wanted to move a Waddle, I think you can get a nice plus on maybe one of these guys, or maybe even a Garrett Wilson wouldn't be a bad idea. You might be able to get a real nice plus on a Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Do you think you could move Garrett Wilson for T. Higgins and a first?
No, not with the injury. But I you know what? I don't know though. I don't really have a great pulse for T. Higgins because I think I've always liked him a little bit less than you, Todd and Brian. But like, he's been so quiet, and with the rib injury and Chase popping off, I definitely really like the idea of sending some T offers out and seeing where the manager's at with him.
I'm gonna get to T later, so I won't belabor it. But I'm a big T guy. I've mentioned it before. It's in my Twitter handle. By T Higgins. Let's move right into the trades. I'm gonna kick it here to Brian. I'm gonna sit out this week on the trades. I've mentioned a couple already. So, Brian, hit us with your first trade that you've made here over the last week.
Yeah, I made quite a few pretty big ones since the last time we chatted, boys and girls. So, bear with me. We'll repeat the details a couple times. But my first trade that I made is on a tank team. So, keeping in mind, I'm trying to shed points to try and get 101 here. I gave up Jamar Chase and my early 3. And I got Justin Jefferson in what I think is a mid to late second. It's still a middling, in my opinion, towards middling more so than later second. So, Todd, what do you think there?
Give us a quick sense on how close you are on the tank. I actually might be in this league with you, but give us a sense on where you are in the tankathon.
It's a pretty much a 2-guy race. So it's one person's getting 101, one person's getting 102. So it's not like a massive swing necessarily. But I just like we talked about this a little bit, so I'll save my breath here and everyone's time. But I view Justin Jefferson above Jamar Chase. So it's just a matter of, like, to me, when I can get a kicker, I'm taking a kicker. Plus, it gives me a better chance at 101. So I know, Matt, you have some feelings here.
No, so I was going to say, I think given your team structure, your tanking, I think it made a ton of sense to send Chase. You sent Chase in an early 3 for JJ in a mid to late second. If the guy played hardball with you, would you have done that trade straight up, Brian?
No.
No, so you were insisting on that little.
Yeah, I'm not doing any 1-to-1s. I've gotten a couple 1-to-1 offers. I decline them. It's just not. No, that's for me. It's not. It's a no. His value to me hasn't changed at all, and I would have taken him above, and especially if I'm tanking. So I'm not going to play like the nitpicking game. They can either, if I'm selling them Chase and they're trying to contend, they better pay up for it. That's how I see it. And I think Chase commands that other people don't. So,
I think that's fair.
We talked about this last week, so we don't need to go into too much detail. A mid 2 on top of Jefferson doesn't really do it for me for Chase. I would just want, I probably want something different. I'm not saying like I want 2 2s or I want, it would be more of like, I want something different. The mid to late second, really a late second, a mid 2 is getting there for me. But I'm just firmly Chase over Jefferson for when we get into the offseason, which is kind of what this discussion is about. This discussion has no meaning the rest of the year to me, because what you're talking about are a contender tank swap. So if I'm a tank and I have Chase and I'm moving my Chase for a Jefferson, I just want a little bit more.
Yeah, one more big one for you guys.
All right, we'll go one more big one, then we'll shift to
one more big one. And this is something that I think we're going to touch on in one of our mini episodes, in the future. So keep an eye out for that too. So contending team, not that this context matters a ton when you hear the details here, but I gave Josh Allen. That's it. Got Mahomes and 2 24 threes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So to me, it was. I found he had a Bills type name on his team name. I knew he was a Bills fan. He has Stephon Diggs. I knew he wanted to pair that stack, and he sent me a 1-to-1. I was like, no, let me get a second for a third. That was my initial counter, and then he came back with 2 3s. So it was as simple as, like, we're just talking tiering. These 2 guys to me are a tier of their own. Quarterbacks. I think maybe you guys agree with me, maybe you don't, but whenever you can stay in the same tier and get some bonus stuff that I can maybe either hit on, darts, or package 2 3s for a 2, maybe at rookie time, that's a massive win in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Mahomes is in that tier of his own by himself. For me, anyway, I think most people would say he is. But I think the only lesson to be gleaned from that is definitely, always be conscious of who the homers are in your team. What, like, if I'm in your league and you're getting frustrated with Jordan Love, send him over to me and see if I'll buy him from you. But yeah, always be aware of the team fandoms and how they might affect players, because on that surface, that deal is nuts to me. I mean, 2/3 doesn't mean much, but like nobody should ever be paying a plus on top of Mahomes for any other player in Dynasty. Josh Allen, I don't care. Like it's just ludicrous that someone paid that to me. Like, but I that's fine. I mean, I get it. It's fun to be a homer. No one knows that as well as I do.
Second lesson that I'll give from this trade is that trading within tiers and grabbing a plus is good. So anytime you can do that, we talked about it a little bit on the receivers. So trading within those receiver tiers, get a plus, because in a couple weeks, things are going to shift and you might have just gotten a guy that's better now. So trading within the tiers, get a plus, love that. So this one was interesting to me because just today, my brother asked me, who would you rather have, Josh Allen or Mahomes? And I said, I'd rather have Mahomes for Dynasty. If you asked me who I think will score more points, probably like this year or next year, if you gun to my head, I'd probably say Josh Allen, and I'd probably put the line at like half a point or something meaningless. So if I'm taking a guy for the next little bit, I guess Josh Allen, but for Dynasty, I still have Mahomes over him. So this is a fun trade. If you can trade within tiers, get a little plus, that's always the way to go.
Yeah, so so I'll get to my trade of the week. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Rashee Rice is available if you're willing to give up Garrett Wilson. It turns out so I traded Deshaun Watson and Garrett Wilson, and I got back my guys C.J. Stroud and Rashee Rice. So Deshaun and Garrett Wilson for Stroud and Rice. This is a team that I'm sort of contending, but not really. I'm like in that 5 to 6 seed range, fringe playoff team. I've never been a Deshaun guy. I've always been a huge Garrett guy. I would rather have Stroud than Garrett Wilson. I'd rather have Deshaun Watson than Rashee Rice, but like, I don't know that the gap is that huge. I'm not a Deshaun guy. So like, so overall, the way I looked at it is I'm paying up. The sticker price is a little high. I'm getting a CJ Stroud, who I trust way more than Deshaun Watson. I'm taking a big downgrade from Garrett Wilson to Rashee Rice. I'm hoping Rice can keep popping the rest of the season and kind of shorten that gap a little bit. Brian, what do you think about that trade?
Yeah, I think I voiced this. I'm in this league, so I think I voiced it a little bit in the league, or maybe to you directly, Matt. I didn't love this one, but I know how you feel about Watson. This trade
reminds me of the GIF where it's like, not great, Bob, when they're in the elevator.
yeah, that's exactly how I think I responded. It was just like, oof, like, I don't know about this one. I get it because Matt's in on Rice. He's in on Rice more and out on Watson more than I am. So it's kind of like.
And that was a trade where a few episodes ago we talked about how I acquired Watson in this league. I've never been a big Watson fan, and that's the risk you take when you kind of trade for a player that you don't like that much, especially one that's valued like Deshaun Watson. Is you're definitely going to be willing to move them below market in a future deal, and that's kind of what I did here. I recognize that this trade is not a great trade right now market wise. I do think this trade will look pretty good.
All right, so let me hop in on that. So let's add a new segment every now and then where we're going to take a Matt trade. Go ahead. Where Brian and I are totally against the trade, and maybe we wait 30, 60 days. We come back and look at them and we say, okay, Matt made this trade. We disagreed. Where are we at today? So I think that'd be a fun kind of like a check back in.
So we can call it who's the idiot. That's an easy name, right?
Hey, I do. So I forgot to mention. So one of my other trades of the week was I did get Garrett Wilson back from this same owner 3 days later, and I do think you guys are going to like that one a little bit more. So this owner who I traded Deshaun and Garrett to, I got Stroud and Rice from. He is a contender, and he had some injuries. So me and him were talking, and I traded him Nico Collins and David Montgomery, and I got Garrett Wilson back from him 3 days after. So I got Stroud. So I got Stroud and Garrett Wilson still on the same team. Love that trade. Love the sequence of the trades, and I think you guys are going to forgive me a tiny bit more.
Shout out to women's lovers, lovers, whatever 007 is. Yeah.
Yeah, friend of the pod, Nick, woman lover on Sleeper. But yeah, no, yeah. So that second trade, I definitely think kind of helped it out. And the last big trade I made over the past week was on a team that I'm tanking, and I traded Joe Burrow away, and I got Anthony Richardson and Josh Downs. And that was just I was talking the guy who got Burrow. He's contending, and the Richardson injury was huge. Obviously, he did not want to give up Downs. He's a big Downs fan too. My buddy Shade. So we had talked about that trade for a couple days, and I wouldn't budge on the price. And he finally kind of succumbed to the price and said, "Fine, I'll give you AR and Downs." And I think next summer startup draft in August, AR and Burrow are going to go back to back, or within 2 or 3 spots in the first round of each other. So, and then I got Downs on top as a tank team. I'm totally fine with that trade.
So let's go into our buys of the week. I've already talked about my buy of the week, really. So I'm trying to buy T. I would love to get even more than I've got. Now I'm not going to buy at crazy prices, but I am trying to. Maybe I'll look at a Garrett Wilson for a T++. Let's see if I can do that. The other thing I'm doing, I've already talked about it. Sell JSN. So those are the 2 moves that I'm looking to make this week.
Yeah, no, I like that, Brian. What about you?
I've probably already hinted at this as well earlier, but I'm trying to buy Pollard. I do have a lot of exposure to him, but I think I'm paying. I think you could probably get him for a mid-late 1 and small filler. Mm-hmm. I think you could probably send Mostert plus a small kicker, and that might appeal to some people, that type of stuff. I think Mostert is great, but his track record is very clear that he's going to get injured. He's
a guy
great.
that I know a young running back you like a lot that you're trying to buy a lot is Tyjae Spears. If you have Spears, like what are you adding to him to buy Pollard if you're contending? Like a second? Would you add a second to Spears for Pollard?
For sure. Easily. Okay. Yeah.
And the Spears is catching people's attention. I think that's a move you can make. So my buy of the week is Josh Downs. Did just mention a buy that I just had for him. I think he's to me, he's at the top of the list of all those rookie wide receivers we talked about, like him, Mims, and Tank Dell, guys like Rashee Rice, guys like that. So I'm looking at buying. So I was looking at keep trade cut guys that are above him still. QJ, Dotson, JMO. I'm selling all 3 of those receivers for Josh Downs. Guys like Dameon Pierce and Ramondre are above Josh Downs on KTC. I do not think that reflects market. I don't think you can make that trade 1 for 1, but I'm definitely trying to do it.
That's fair. Yeah, something to keep an eye out. Todd, you want to take us out?
Yeah, so we'll wrap things up here. So I'm going to be selling JSN, buying T. Maybe I'll try to sell a JSN for T. We've got Brian going to be buying Pollard, and Matt's buy will be Josh Downs. So thank you all for joining us. Please rate the podcast for us. Keep giving us feedback in the DMs. It really helps us a lot. For Brian, for Matt, I'm Todd. Thanks for joining the Dynasty Market Watch.